Hey guys, Taylor here at the Leather Guy, and we're going to do a quick beginner's leather belt. So what you're going to need is a mallet, a pre-cut belt strap, or cut your own if you've got the means, go for it. We're going to need a couple of leather punches. I've got a belt buckle set here, our Chicago screws. This will allow you to change the belt buckle later should you so decide. A nice sharp utility knife, and a screwdriver. And don't forget the ruler. Rulers are pretty helpful. So, to start, we're going to take the one end of our belt and put it through our belt loop so we can kind of get an idea of how much leather we need to pull through, what's going to accommodate our belt loop, our Chicago screws, just what kind of spacing we're looking at, how far we want everything to be away from the buckle. I kind of like to do a solid visual using the actual hardware, get a good idea where I want to place it. You can make a template if you plan on doing a lot of these in rapid fire, or if you just feel more comfortable doing a template, go for it. In this case, I'm just going to kind of eyeball it, and I'm going to use the awl to mark where I want to punch my hole for my Chicago screw to come through. So I'm just using it as my spacer and then going under it to the center of that space and creating a little demarcation so I know where to create my hole. So I'm going to take the rest of the hardware away. Now that I've got my guide mark, I'm going to take my hole punch. Here I'm just kind of figuring out which size is going to work better with the Chicago screw. I want it to fit snugly, but I don't want it to be too small or too loose. So this seems like a pretty good match. So I am going to punch out the hole on my two marks that I made with the awl. And I do want to say using a granite or stone top like this when you're working with these kind of tools is so helpful because it takes a lot of the bounce out of the table and really helps your tool cut through the leather. So once you have those, you can go ahead and slide the buckle in there again for a reference point. Make sure that that's the length of leather that you want. I'm just going to give it a couple quick taps to really kind of get that fold a little cleaner, a little nicer, sitting better. And then we're going to flip it over, and I am going to use a marker to mark the back side of my blank. So this way, when I punch the holes, my Chicago screws are going to be identical. They're going to match right up. There's going to be no wiggle room in the punched holes there. So we're just going to make sure both of those holes matched up. They look good. Double checking that the spacing is good with our belt loop. Now we need to cut a hole for the actual post from the belt buckle to go through. So in this case, there's a lot of leather workers, belt makers that have these oblong punches. I do not have one on hand, unfortunately, and I would assume most people just making a belt for fun don't have one either. So what I'm doing is marking on both sides of the fold the space that I need for my post to have free movement. And then I am actually punching holes on either end of that line. So one on the top, one on the bottom. And once I have those fully punched through, I'm actually just going to take my utility knife and cut from the side of one punch down to the other one. So cutting out that space between the two holes is going to give me that nice oblong shape. And then that way, when you're buckling or unbuckling the belt, the post has some free movement. It's not going to be just jammed stick straight forward if you were to just do like a small hole. If you do too big of a hole, it might just woggle around and you're going to have a hard time maybe getting it under control while you're trying to do up the front of your belt. So, yeah, we're just going to cut a nice little channel for the belt buckle. Fairly easy. And you can actually clean this up a bit by applying some gum tragacanth inside of that if you feel like it looks a little rough since you are cutting between two holes. And right now I'm just kind of cleaning up some of the nap that's showing through. But once you're happy with that hole, you can go ahead and start putting all of your hardware on. So we can put the belt buckle back on. We're going to check and make sure that that post fits nicely through it. Oh, it slides right through. Perfect. Now the post is poking through the fold in the belt we have there, which is great. So now we can add our belt loop. And again, that is going to go in between the two marks we made for the Chicago screw, so it'll hold it in place there. So I've sped up the video a little bit here just because watching somebody put Chicago screws in is kind of boring. It's pretty straightforward. You're going to push the post through the holes you've made. I made these holes a little more snug, so what I just did there was use the mallet to batten down some of the leather around the post. It's fine that it's snug. It's going to keep the hardware nice and tight and in place. It's just if you find it a little difficult, like with this one, the mallet comes in kind of handy to help you get the leather flattened out around the post. Once you have the post through, you just put the screw end of the Chicago screw in, as you can see I'm doing here, and use the screwdriver to tighten them. I like using the Chicago screw because as long as you take care of the leather should be able to be used for quite a while. That can't always be said about the belt buckles themselves, or you might grow out of the belt buckle. So doing the Chicago screws like this gives you an option to change out the color, style, however you want to. If the belt buckle should break, something weird happens like that, you can remove it without having to throw out the whole belt. So, but by all means, if you want to use rivets or anything like that, you are more than welcome to. It's totally up to you. I just think this is nice to have that flexibility. When it comes to measuring your belt, belts are hard. Your best bet is to, if you're making it for yourself, get your actual measurement. At this point, you could take the belt and wrap it around yourself and find where would be the ideal spot for you to punch a hole to buckle it. If you're making it for someone else, using their pant size can be a little sketchy. Simply because not all clothing manufacturers make their clothes the same size, where one might have a size 40 jean, another company might be a nice size 38. So if you are working from a pant size, you're probably going to want to add a few inches. You may even want to add upwards of like 6 inches. If you're going off an actual measurement, somebody's taken their measurement with a measuring tape and given it to you. I would say you just want to add 2 to 3 inches to it and make that actual measurement your center hole. So in this case, we would say this was like a 46-inch belt that we were making. But I've added a couple inches on either side of it so that there's room for them to grow or shrink. But best bet is to either measure it on the person you're making it for or use an old belt of theirs to mark all of your holes. So each of these holes are spaced about an inch apart. You can see I used a paper template. It's just one I made from an old belt I had kicking around. It makes sure that my holes are straight and even, and it makes it a lot easier. You can freehand it for sure. If you don't feel like making a paper template, don't worry about it, but I would say that it saves you a little bit of time and a little bit of stress in keeping your hole punch straight. So here, really honestly, you've got a finished belt. if you're a beginner, a first timer, this is a pretty good belt. You're ready to go. If you want to give it a little bit more flair, you can do a different edge cut on here. So, same thing with the template. Previous belt I had just had a nice rounded end to it. So, I'm going to use that. And this is when the owl will come into play again. So I am just going to scratch into the top of the leather along this shape here. Once I have a good clean mark, I'm going to throw the template to the side here and bust out the utility knife again and just do a nice, slow, steady cut. Once this has been cut through, if you want to do some finishing on the edge of the belt, you could certainly hit it with a little gum tragacanth. You could do a edge coat. In this case, since this was pre-cut, it's a really nice kind of sturdy, thick oil tan. The edges are really clean and ready to go. So it's totally up to you if you want to add some stitching, add some edge detail, do some stamping. But here you go, a nice, simple belt.